a 6-liter LS and you want to modify it. Either you already have a 6-liter in your truck or you have one that you're swapping in something else. So the question is, what should I do? What mod should I perform? What cylinder head should I use? What intake should I use? And most importantly, what camshaft should I use? How should I modify my 6-liter? Maybe we should do a build-up. How about a couple of different mods? How about 10 6-liter combos? In this video, we're going to take a look at no less than 10 different combinations. I'm going to show you a variety of different cylinder heads that we ran on a 6-liter, a variety of different camshafts we ran on a 6-liter, and even a variety of different intake manifolds that we ran on a 6-liter. We ran Cathedral port heads, we ran RecPort heads, we ran Cathedral cams, we ran RecPort cams, we ran stock cams, we ran all kinds of stuff, so you can take a look at what you want to do to your 6-liter. Okay guys, before we get to our testing, I want to bring up something very important, and that's the fact that we used an LY6 short block for all of our testing. But all of this stuff applies equally well to an LQ4 or an LQ9, or heck, even an LS3 short block. You see, all of the 6-liter stuff and even the 6-liter stuff, all of the modifications that we did on this LY6 6-liter short block apply to all of the other 6-liters. Now, obviously, the compression is going to be different on an LQ4 versus an LQ9, and even versus an LQ6. But the reality is, that's not going to change the results. Sure, more compression is going to add power, but it adds power both on the baseline number and on the modified number. So the results of a cylinder head test are going to be the same on a LQ9 because it has a little more compression. I want to point out something very important here. A lot of guys think that compression works well with one specific kind of camshaft or one specific kind of cylinder head or intake manifold, and it does not. Compression is a lot like boost. It basically adds power everywhere, and we always use a percentage to show how much it adds, but the reality is that's just an easy mathematical formula. Compression adds power everywhere, no matter what camshaft you put in it. If I compare two different camshafts on one motor that has 8-to-1 and the other motor that has 11-to-1, the camshaft change is going to be the same on both motors. It's just going to start out lower and end lower on the motor that has less compression, and it's going to start out higher and end higher on a motor that has more compression. So what I'm saying is we ran all these tests on an LY6 6-liter, but it applies equally well to an LQ4 or an LQ6. Let's get to our results. To get things started on our upgrades to the 6-liter, we're going to start off with Cathedral port heads, and then for the next one we'll go into the RecPort head stuff, because obviously the RecPort head can be used on a 6-liter, which the factory did on a number of combinations. Now, as I indicated earlier in our discussion, it doesn't matter whether you're starting off with an LQ4, an LQ9, or in this case an LY6. They're basically all the same. You'll see a minor difference in compression ratio for each one that you start with, but that will just improve both the starting power and the ending power of any of the modifications. The changes from the modifications will basically stay consistent. It just matters the starting point and the ending point. So we're going to start off this 6-liter. It's an LY6 short block, and we have a cam in it because if you're going to modify a 6-liter, the first thing that you should do with any 6-liter, regardless of which one it is, if you want to get the most bang for your buck, is put a camshaft in it. Cam and springs are the big upgrade for any LS. That's what you should start with, unless you're starting with a turbo, which is also a good start even with a stock cam. But we set up this LY6 short block with a Comp 54-459-11 camshaft, and it's not the go-to 469 cam. It's the Cathedral port version of that, which is a 617, 624 lift split, a 231, 239 degree duration split, and 114 degree lobe separation angle. So basically, it's the 469 cam, but with less exhaust duration. And don't worry, I'm going to show you a comparison between this and the other cam, and it's not really very much different because they're both really kind of similar. So what we did was we got things started by installing a set of 799 heads. Now, the 799 heads, for guys that don't know, 799, 243, basically the go-to like high-performance factory Cathedral port head. These work really well, and actually on a 6-liter, and I'm going to show you the difference between the 799 and the 706 head, these might be as good or better choice than the smaller 706 head on this bigger 6-liter. So we ran this thing with 799 heads, and I put a Dorman LS2 intake manifold on it, which you've seen in any of my other videos or the stories I did on it. The Dorman LS2 is basically the functional equivalent of a Trailblazer SS. It's just a lower profile and it fits. When I compare the two back to back, the whole power curves are almost identical. There's a little bit of wiggling here and there, but basically they're the same kind of thing. This Dorman LS2 works really well.
We had a 92mm throttle body on it, 1 7/8" long tube headers, and tuned all of this and all of these combinations with the Holley HP management system. So run with the stock 799 head. The only thing we did was put valve springs on it. No milling, no bigger valves, no porting, no nothing. Just an as-cast stock 799 head with valve springs on it. Run with those heads. Our 6-liter produced 522 horsepower and 481 foot-pounds of torque. So now I know what you guys are thinking. Okay, well, what if I had a 6-liter and I wanted to upgrade 317 heads, which, by the way, we should address the elephant in the room. 317 heads you should just get rid of unless you're running boost, and I'm sorry if I hurt the feelings of all the 317 guys out there. But in terms of all the factory heads, that's low man on the totem pole. Because of the compression, it makes the least amount of power of any of the factory heads, and you can see that in any of my other videos. So if you're going to upgrade that head, the easiest and least expensive choice is to put a set of 706 heads on from the 5.3, because people will just give those away. Although maybe not after all the videos I've done. But here's what happened when we replaced the 799 heads with 706 heads. So the 706 head made more power than the 799, up to about 5,000 RPM. And out here at the top, from about 5,900 on out, the 799 head made more power, because on the 6-liter, unlike the 5.3, which the 706 head is a much better choice, on the 6-liter, the bigger bore and this power output, and that's very important, this power output can take advantage of the extra airflow offered by the 799 243 head. They flow a little more than the 706, and they work well on the bigger bore, so that combination allows them to make a little more peak power. Although down low, they didn't make as much as the 706 head, and everybody points to compression, but we were only talking about around 3 cc's difference between these two heads, so this is not all compression. People need to realize that that's also a combination of the smaller valve size and the port volume and the chamber shape, and there are other things that make this kind of head, this 706 head, want to make to enhance power in this RPM range. So now let's take a look at the other modifications we did to our 6-liter. After comparing the 706 and the 799 heads, we'll get rid of our 706. So you're probably asking yourself, hey Richard, what happens if I want to upgrade the heads on my 6-liter? What can I do to improve the power output compared to a set of 799 heads? And obviously you could put more camshaft in this, although there's a limit to how much camshaft you can put in with the available piston to valve clearance, and something in the 231 or so degree intake duration, which is usually the valve that's going to hit first, depending on the lobe separation angle and the valve events. You know, you're getting up near, you have a limited piston to valve clearance, so there's not a lot more that you can get from the camshaft. So what happens if you upgrade the cylinder head on this? And a natural upgrade for this would be to go to an aftermarket head, and what we did was put a trick flow head on it. So here's what happened when we put a TFS 225 head in place of the 799 head. And you can see we picked up quite a bit of power. Power output jumped from 522 up to 560 horsepower. And in this case, we ran the trick flow 225 head with the same Dorman LS2 intake and 92mm throttle body. But here's another interesting test, and it shows, you know, the gains of an intake manifold when you're talking about this kind of power level. The factory intakes obviously were not designed to work on a combination that was making over 550 horsepower, although they're doing pretty well. And the Dorman one, the Dorman version, actually is pretty good. But here's what happened when we replaced the Dorman intake with a fast intake and with these 225 heads. And as you can see, there were big gains starting at 4,300 RPM or so. So equipped with a fast, the power output jumped to 576 horsepower, and you can see it's carrying it fairly well, even past 6,500 RPM. We ran it all the way out to 6,800, and it was still making the same power out there at 6,800. So the fast intake on this combination is definitely worth some power. I mean, we're talking about gains of 40, 53. You know, we're talking about 15 to 16 horsepower over the other stuff. So if you're looking for that last little bit, the fast manifold, I know it's more expensive than the Dorman, but not so much anymore. I think they've raised the price on the Dorman, and they're much more money. So I might spend a little extra and just get the fast to begin with, especially if I was going to upgrade the cylinder heads. So now you're probably wondering, hey, Richard, what about that? You guys are all wondering stuff, huh? what about that 469 cam? So here's what happened when we ran this is with the 799 heads in the dormant intake. But here's what happened when I ran this combination with the 469 cam instead of the 459 cam. And the only difference between the 469 cam is it just had a lot more exhaust duration. But here's what happened. It basically lost power down low and then picked up power in other parts in the curve. So it liked the added exhaust duration. It just doesn't like it as much down low. The idle quality goes down a little bit from the extra exhaust duration. It basically just wants to make power at a higher RPM. So, you know, if that's what you want, that's a good cam. And that's a RecPort cam on a Cathedral port head, and it still works. So now let's take a look and see what happened on our 6-liter if we step up to the RecPort head. This is the starting point for our RecPort modifications to our 6-liter head. And again, we started off with an LY6 short block, but you could do this with an LQ4 or an LQ9. In fact, we ran a stock LQ4 camshaft in this thing. We replaced the VVT stuff that comes in the LY6. So basically, this would be the same thing as if you put RecPort LY6 or LS3 heads on your stock LQ4 or LQ9 6-liter with a stock camshaft in it. So here's what happened when we started things out. We still had the LY6, the truck version of the LS3 intake manifold, which, by the way, produces identical power numbers to the factory LS3 intake. So those two are the same, even though they look different. They made almost identical power curves every time I've tested them. So fundamentally, they're the same thing. So this LQ4 cammed LY6, our starting point, produced 443 horsepower and 467 foot-pounds of torque. So on these combinations, what I want to do is show you what happens if we did a little bit milder stuff, and then we can work our way up to a lot more camshaft. So the first thing I did was we put, what happens if I wanted to put an upgrade with like one of the stock cams? So what we did was put a factory LS3 camshaft in here. Let's see, here we go. So equipped with the LS3 cam, the power output jumped to 475 horsepower. But as you can see, which is a fairly good gain, especially past 4,500 RPM, it picked up power. But compared to the factory LQ4 cam, it lost power down low, and we see that almost all the time. When I compare the LS3 camshaft to like the LM7 camshaft, we saw the same thing. It loses power up to about this point and then gains power afterwards. So you're trading power. So you guys have to decide, is that factory camshaft upgrade really what I want to do, or do I want to go to an aftermarket cam? And here's what happened when we put the camshaft from TrickFlow in it. Basically, it was the sloppy stage 2 camshaft. So it was like a 228-degree duration. Here we go. So that was actually a good upgrade compared to that factory LS3 cam. The peak power jumped up to 513 or 514 horsepower. Peak torque was up to 493 foot-pounds, and it gained power even over that mild stock cam, even down as low as 3,000 RPM. So that's a fairly good upgrade if you want to pick up power everywhere. It picked up, a good amount. We're over 500 horsepower, 514 horsepower. But here's what happened when we put the, something a little bit, a little bit bigger cam, like the 459 or 469 camshaft in here. So here's the 459 camshaft, and as you can see, big gains past 52 or 5300 compared to that sloppy stage 2 cam. Basically big gains compared to the factory cam. It kind of fell below the factory cam, below 3500 or 4000, but picked up power from 4000 on out and ended up making a peak power of 541 horsepower. And here's what happened when we put instead of the 459 cam, we put the 469 camshaft in. And it just, again, it did kind of what it did in the last test on the Cathedral port heads. It lost power down low here in the 3000 range, picked up power out here past 6500. Everywhere else, it was basically identical. So there's fundamentally no difference unless you're revving the thing way out or care about the idle quality and the low speed stuff. Then maybe the 459 cam is a better way to go. But here's what happened when we ran. So this is what happened if you ran a factory LY6 or LS3 head upgrade on your cammed 6-liter, whether it's an LQ4, LQ9, or in this case an LY6. which in that case it's just a cam upgrade. But in the others, it would be a cam and head upgrade. So now you might be thinking, well, what about, and by the way, the peak power was 543 with a 469 cam. But now you're probably wondering, well, hey, Richard, how does that compare to the trick flow headed Cathedral port? Well, let's take a look at that. And as you can see, the ultimate combination with the Cathedral port stuff with the trick flow head and the fast intake manifold, made 576. So it's still better than the factory RecPort head. And I know a lot of guys, here's the comment I always get when I run this kind of test, because I posted this before in another video. Yeah, but what about if I put a fast intake on the RecPort heads? Well, unfortunately, the fast intake on the RecPort head does not gain power like it does on the Cathedral port head. In fact, it probably would show no gain at this power level on these RecPort heads. So it would be the same curve. The factory LS3 intake manifold or the LY6 intake manifold is really hard to beat, as fast guys have found out. And that fast LS3 just doesn't really add power there. So this is still a good comparison, because actually the Dorman intake, if anything, I think holds it back compared to the factory LS3 manifold on the other combination. The TrickFlow 225 heads are just a better head than the factory LS3 head is. Now maybe you could put a ported RecPort head on there, and especially one that had a milled head that had the right compression, then you could get that up to the standard. But I'm not comparing those two things. I'm not telling you which one is better. I'm just showing you this is what they do, and these are the kind of power gains that you can get if you run these combinations, because they work very well. There's obviously more power to be had from the factory head, because we've made almost 700 horsepower, I think, with those combinations. So you can definitely get a lot of power output of it on the right combination. But here's what happens when you upgrade your 6-liter. Let's get to our conclusion.
Okay, guys, what'd you think about all those test results on our 6-liter LY6? As I said, you could apply that equally well to an LQ4 or an LQ9, but on the LY6, we did a lot of testing. We compared a bunch of Cathedral port heads and a bunch of rectangular port heads and a bunch of camshafts and a bunch of intake manifolds. Did you guys get any ideas for the stuff that you want to do to your 6-liter? Is there something I missed? Is there something else I should test? Now, here's something important. I know guys are going to want me to try, I wanted to try a camshaft that was between that sloppy stage 2 and the 459 or the 469. You can just draw a line in between those two and pretend that we did that, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Same thing with the milder stock cams. If you look at videos I did on all of the stock cams on the 5.3 liter and you see the difference, that's going to be the difference on the 6-liter. It's just that the crossover point for some of these wilder cams is going to be shifted back a little bit in the RPM range, and by back I mean down a little bit in the RPM range. It works a little bit better on the bigger motor, and that's all that's going to happen. So all of these modifications should give you a good idea what to do with yours. Sure, if you want to put a specific camshaft in there like a truck cam, I know guys are going to talk about, I want you to do a torque one. I want you to do a 6-liter to maximize the torque. And believe me, I have that coming. I'm definitely going to do that. We'll do a small torque cam and the 706 heads, and we'll maybe mill them and do the chamber openings and all that stuff. So all that stuff is coming up. But for right now, this should give you a really good idea what to do with your 6-liter. Thanks for watching, guys. Richard Holdner here. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. More testing coming up.